Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Control of Cancer, the podcast brought to you by the North East London Cancer Alliance. Now, whether you're a patient or a healthcare professional, we hope this podcast gives you tangible things that you can do to help when it comes to cancer. We want to be a how-to guide to help you overcome common myths, fears, and barriers to cancer prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and care. We know that not all cancers are preventable, but there are things that we can all do to make a real positive difference to the health and well-being of our family, our friends, and our colleagues, and ourselves. This episode is all about a cancer that you may well not have heard of if you're not a healthcare professional. It's one of the hidden, misunderstood cancers, and it's neuroendocrine cancer. I'm joined by Cathy Bouvier-Ellis, who's the CEO and co-founder of Neuroendocrine Cancer UK. I'm also joined by Jane Aylott, who's a patient sharing her lived experience, and Sarita Yaganti, who's the programme lead for personalised cancer care here at the North East London Cancer Alliance. So thank you so much for joining me, all three of you. Catherine, let's just start off with you for a bit of background on what exactly neuroendocrine cancer is, and if we can, give us some facts and figures. I've got a couple of facts and figures, but give us some facts and figures to give us some context about how common this cancer is.
First of all, we call them neuroendocrine cancers. The medical term is neuroendocrine neoplasms, so that's something that you'll see, in research papers and articles, etc. And that's what's being classified by the World Health Organization. But neuroendocrine cancers they're quite complex and diverse, but they're cancers that develop out of our neuroendocrine cells and a neuroendocrine system that a lot of people don't know about. And really, your neuroendocrine cells, they're like translators, I guess. So your brain will send signals to your endocrine glands to release hormones or peptides, and your neuroendocrine cells will translate those so that the endocrine system can understand them better and release things for our normal bodily functions, whether that's, releasing your insulin for, when you eat, or, even breathing, all sorts of things, really. There's around 6,000 people that are diagnosed each year. So the incidence is, relatively uncommon, but the prevalence is really huge. So the amount of people that are living today with neuroendocrine cancer is really anywhere between kind of 35 and 45,000 people. One of our biggest issues is recognition and understanding of this disease, but also the amount of late diagnosis we have. So less than 20% of those that are diagnosed will be diagnosed at stage 1, which means the majority of our community will have been diagnosed with metastatic disease at the time of diagnosis, which makes life very difficult and uncertain for that whole population.
And does that come from the fact that, like you said, a lot of the symptoms, are there any typical symptoms? And is it the fact that, like you said, it can appear like it's explainable by some other condition that maybe is a bit more well known?
Yeah, I think absolutely. It's always difficult when there's kind of a system-wide cancer, a little bit like sarcoma. It's not site-specific. The most common sites are your GI tract and your lung, but that just happens to be where most of our neuroendocrine cancer cells are. Our neuroendocrine cells are. But a lot of the symptoms can be vague or non-specific, but they will tend to increase and get worse over time. But it means that so many of the community have gone forwards and back to GPs, had lots of tests and scans that are perhaps inappropriate. And, end up feeling, really quite distraught and stressed. And in fact, about 1 in 4 with stage 4 disease, their symptoms have been, attributed to anxiety. And part of that is this whole odyssey of diagnosis going, there's something wrong with me. I can't really work out what it is, but there's something the matter. And, that in itself is quite a horrific stat, really.
Definitely. So is that kind of why it's known as sort of hidden or misunderstood cancer? Because I guess, we talk about things like breast cancer or or bowel cancer, some people might have some knowledge of the symptoms. So you might, get a breast lump and you go into the doctor knowing or thinking this is what it might be. I imagine you
Mm.
go to the doctor with some of the symptoms for this kind of, one of these kind of cancers, and you probably actually haven't even got any idea that you're going in with, a symptom that could be cancer in some cases.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good point, because in fact we did a quite a large survey of around 1,000 patients, and I think only about 10 or 12% of them actually thought cancer at all. The
Yeah,
majority of people thought, oh, I must just have like a really bad bowel, or maybe it's menopausal symptoms, maybe I've got a late onset asthma,
yeah,
whatever it could be. Maybe I'm just stressed and overworked, or I've got, running around after the kids, all the things. We do that very well, don't we?
yeah,
The whole, we can blame something in our life for the way that we feel. And I think that stops us going to the doctors often, because you think, well, hopefully it will go away. But yeah, and it can be hugely challenging. And we have a number of patients who have been misdiagnosed and treated for that diagnosis. One particular patient comes to mind who was diagnosed with about 4 different things, one of them lupus. And she went down the lupus pathway, which is actually a really good pathway for a whole year. But she doesn't have lupus at all. She had a pancreatic neuroendocrine cancer. So, and that wastes so much time and money and
yeah.
resource, obviously, but also that meant she had metastatic disease at the time of diagnosis.
So is that, I mean, without, obviously not wanting to point any fingers at GPs or anybody that, is, possibly like misdiagnosing or not recognizing um, a certain cancer early, but what, what's going on there? Is it the fact that the symptoms are so, so well aligned with another condition, or is education even among GPs on neuroendocrine cancer not where it should be?
I think there's I think both of those are valid reasons. I think there's a very big lack of recognition of this disease. I think the symptomology does cause problems, and I think we have to be realistic that some of the symptoms do make it quite difficult for a diagnosis, unless you have the more aggressive type, which is called a neuroendocrine carcinoma. And those symptoms can be far more aligned, I suppose, with red flag cancer symptoms, if you like, because they're a far more aggressive type of cancer. But for the majority of the neuroendocrine tumours, there is that. But education is non-existent, Steve. It's not. It's not lacking.
Yeah,
It's nothing that's treated. I mean, rare cancers as a whole, really rare and less common cancers, are very rarely discussed in any depth in training, in medical training. We've in fact set up, with the RCGP, a training course around neuroendocrine cancer. And the international community has developed a really big online course as well for GPs. But it's not just GPs either. They see so many things. Why would they be specialised particularly in this type of cancer? But even in secondary care, the patient's getting the wrong scans, which then come back negative, and then of course they go back to their GP, and then it's like, well, what do we do now? We've done all your bloods, we've done all your scans, everything's negative. So I think we need to change the way that we look at rare and less common cancers. They are the cancers that are the majority of cancers, even though there's a lot of them. And there just needs to be some more care and attention. And I'm hoping the new cancer plan will have some significant pages, I guess, on rare and less common cancers in there.
Jane, before I come to you and I get your story, just important, Sarita, just to maybe off the back of what Catherine said, just talk about some of the work that maybe is going on in the alliance with neuroendocrine cancer.
Yeah, so everything that Catherine said is, we've started to really recognise the importance of it. I mean, we've always recognised the importance, but it's because it's so misdiagnosed, and the journey, and Jane will tell you herself, like, it can be so convoluted. So if cancer's not in the first thought for whoever's the first point of contact for that patient, whether it's a GP, primary care nurse, or somebody else within A&E or from a screening service, I think the point I'm making is that there isn't any national guidelines. The National Institute of Clinical Excellence, so there's no NICE guidance. for neuroendocrine tumours. So, but working with NCUK, you've got an ideal pathway. And Jane and I met with the expert reference groups with the charity recently. So through the HPB expert reference groups to kind of have that discussion. So a lot of work will be starting to really define something that's not really clearly defined locally. And a lot of our patients actually go through to north central London. So there's a kind of cross geography pathway. But I think the point that Catherine, you raised about that non-site specific. So it's not just the neuroendocrine. There's quite a few other rarer cancers or less common cancers that, if there was through our diagnostics pathway, to have those clear guidelines to think about neuroendocrine, to actually flag it, even with GPs. I mean, we can perhaps start building these case studies as part of that education. And I know that the charity itself, Catherine, you guys got a lot of resources, so I'm really keen to kind of move with something that's already been established. And it's not just about creating new things and spending more money. We can actually approach this with resources already in place and the expertise.
Integration, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jane, right, let's get into your story and take us back to pre-diagnosis. Well, how were you diagnosed, and maybe what were the things that you'd noticed before your diagnosis?
I think I knew something was wrong. My main symptom was pain, and it would be in the same place. It might come, it might go, it might be excruciating, it might be a dull ache. And when you live in, busy life with children and working and things, if it passes, you sort of don't forget about it, but you let it ride a little bit. So I'd go to the GP, say I've got this pain, examine me. They might even send me for a general blood test, but that's never going to show anything up.
Where was the pain? Sorry, Jane.
It was my primary is in my pancreas. I was
Right.
diagnosed with metastatic, so liver as well, and distant lymph nodes. So the pancreas, I probably didn't know where it was at the time, but it's sort of a hidden little organ. And pain can radiate, but it was always in the same place on my left-hand side, which I think is not, not the final thing. I've seen people with right-hand side pain, and so it can be anywhere. And I'd be sent away. Oh, the blood tests say you're fine. You can't feel a mass, and this went on for several years, to be honest. And once I was diagnosed, there was a series of coincidences. It was because I've been sent on the gynecological route, which often happens with women with neuroendocrine cancer, I think. And a gastroenterologist re-looked at a scan that I'd had done, which had been mislabeled as the tumours in the liver as hemangioma, which I understand to be sort of internal birthmarks. And he looked again and suspected neuroendocrine cancer. The only reason being he'd done a rotation under one of the leading figures in neuroendocrine cancer, Professor Kaplan at the Royal Free Hospital. So it was an element of luck. It was an element of, sliding doors moments. It could have gone anyway if he hadn't looked again, really. It was his inquisitiveness that helped me get a diagnosis.
So in those years between kind of your first appointment and when you weren't getting the diagnosis, did you always kind of know there was something wrong, or were you being reassured by the fact that they were doing blood tests and they weren't finding anything, or how were you kind of feeling in that period?
I knew there was something wrong, but you can be reassured by a confident GP, can't you? And I remember going in there once and saying that I was told I had IBS, and if I had flax seeds every day, that would solve the problem. Of course, it didn't. But I remember walking out of the GP surgery thinking, okay, IBS, I can read up on that. I can do something about that. That's not so bad. But obviously, it wasn't the case at all.
So what happened after diagnosis, and take us through kind of what treatment looked like and how you've managed it since.
Again, I was very lucky in that I was the gastroenterologist wrote a personal letter to Professor Kaplan and said, I've got this patient, I'd be obliged if you would see her. And so I went directly to a centre of excellence where they have years and years of experience of this.
To Catherine, what does treatment look like? What are the kind of treatment options for neuroendocrine? What does it routinely involve?
I mean, I think because of the complexity of the different types of tumours, depending on the type, the stage, the grade, the histopathology, which is really gold standard in order to be able to define what the best treatment is. For the majority of neuroendocrine tumours, so not the neuroendocrine carcinomas, which are the more aggressive types, things like chemotherapy and radiotherapy probably aren't first-line therapies. So you're looking more at therapies like somatostatin analogues to try and reduce some of the hormonal outlay and actually stabilise some tumours in some of the lower grade. Or you're looking at other targeted therapies or molecular radiotherapies, which is really, kind of a fifth pillar of cancer care now. Surgery, of course, if we can operate and remove, then that will be your first line. And for some of the primaries, pancreatic and lung, you may start with a form of chemotherapy, perhaps not the ones that are used in those particular primary, more common site cancers. But for the rest, it will be, and of course, pain relief and whatever else that you might require to just try and manage some of your symptoms. But yeah, I mean, the sort of more common cancer program probably isn't that relatable to the neuroendocrine world. Although Jane will attest to the fact that obviously she has had and is having chemotherapy, but with the pancreatic primary.
But it's interesting, Jane. I wonder, had you heard of neuroendocrine cancer before you were diagnosed?
No, and I was probably one of those people that sort of glaze over when you say neuroendocrine. Sort of.
But I bet you'd heard of breast cancer and bowel cancer, and
of course, yes, of course, yes.
So Sarita, this is quite a challenge, isn't it? Because you're trying to get people to recognise symptoms early of a cancer that they've never even probably heard of.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of the vagueness, so the symptoms, as we've heard, can start from anywhere. It doesn't necessarily shout out cancer. But you know what would be quite interesting, Jane, is like if we had all the healthcare professionals that were involved in your journey, because your route to getting a diagnosis was quite numerous years. So I can imagine you've had numerous healthcare professionals kind of as part of your investigation. If this was taken as a case study, I would be really interested to know what their reflections would have been. Would it have been a case of, they now know is neuroendocrine, they might say, oh gosh, that's what I missed, or, having that kind of a reflection opportunity. I don't know if that happens because people come in and out the system so quickly. And then I'm also thinking, Jane, about your family, because I know if I see my family members in pain and I feel helpless helping them. So is that kind of support, I think, is really missing while someone's waiting for their diagnosis. So generally, we try to get a diagnosis, or at least a 2-week wait appointment within 2 weeks, sorry. And then, diagnosis as soon as possible after. And there's lots of kind of targets attached to that. But then there's the support element, and we know, myself and Jane have known each other quite numerous of years, and I 100% understand the psychological impact it has from just not knowing. But obviously, until the diagnosis is given as a cancer, where does it fit in? So should it be back to your GP as a kind of like, or your primary care? Your primary care team doesn't necessarily have to be the GP to be able to kind of signpost to different like psychological support. I'm not saying you haven't received it, Jan. I'm not saying that other patients don't, but I would be curious to know, while waiting for that diagnosis, what happens. As a cancer alliance, we tend to come in once that diagnosis is made, so it's kind of a missing link, I think, that I'd really like to explore.
That GP question is so interesting, isn't it? Because I've spoken to a lot of people with a lot of rare cancers over the years, and they all kind of tell a similar story of having had, what is a symptom that could be any number of non-sinister conditions, and And I bet that if you got, there was one young lad called Jack who had an extremely rare cancer that was the first symptom was a weeping tear duct, and I have such sympathy for GPs, because if they, you can only really sort of question a decision if you took that person back into that same situation, and they said, I should have made a different decision then. Whereas the majority of the time, like, there's no reason for them to have any suspicion. We
Yeah.
talk all the time, don't we, about go and see a doctor because chances are it won't be cancer. Well, a doctor's probably thinking, along the same lines. Chances are it probably isn't. So it's really difficult, isn't it, to say to them, I'm going to refer you with, some of the, unexplained weight loss, or nausea or vomiting, or some of the symptoms that maybe in hindsight would have indicated what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think just to jump in there, when I speak to some GPs that we have in our community who also have neuroendocrine cancer, they didn't even diagnose themselves. Or in fact, one GP did, one of our trustees, he actually did diagnose himself. But, they will say that they're taught to think of the most common things first because that's what it's likely to be. So, when you're dealing with a rare and less common cancer community, how are they supposed to learn 200 different types of rare and less common cancer? It would be impossible, right? I think there just needs to be some way that we can make a diagnosis that's definitive. And I think a lot of our community go away without a definitive diagnosis. Every symptom needs to have an explanation. And I think that's one of the issues that I struggle with, is that IBS, for example, it just doesn't happen. You don't suddenly get it over 50. So why are so many people diagnosed with IBS?
I hear IBS a lot. You hear IBS a lot, don't you, for different cancers?
Yeah, it's not even really a diagnosis. Yeah. There's so many different types of sort of bowel malfunction, if you like. And so I think we've got to start thinking about just how it affects people when you can't say something definitive or a reason for. You have a symptom for a reason, right? Your body reacts in a way for a certain reason. And I think that's what we need to start thinking about. And whatever algorithms are used within primary or secondary healthcare, or whatever we move on with, A1 or AI, we have to be.
That's a conversation from before we started recording. Just reference.
It's about adding in all of these potential differentials that could be other than, some of the more common cancer symptoms, because otherwise we're never going to improve diagnostic times. We were maybe 7 to 8 years when I started in this field 25 years ago. I guess the common time to diagnosis is 4 to 5 years, but that is so unacceptable.
What's your background, Catherine? How did you get involved with neuroendocrine cancer?
So I was a specialist nurse in the field at the Royal Free in London, and I co-founded the organisation from there with some support of.
You just kind of saw a lack of support. You saw like a big gaping hole for some people.
Yeah, and people just desperate and lonely and unsure. And I think Jane will agree with me that the insecurity and the lack of, you don't know what's going to happen next. You're living with this uncertainty that you've had right the way through your diagnosis. You've had this horrible odyssey of getting diagnosed. Your trust in your healthcare teams is probably slightly damaged because you're like, I told you there was something wrong with me. And then, we can't even guarantee what's going to happen within the neuroendocrine cancer space, simply because we haven't probably got enough details research-wise, etc., etc. So it's just this uncertainty, when are the tumours going to grow? When are they going to metastasize further? When are they going to de-differentiate and become more aggressive types of cancer? Our patients are dealing with this kind of stuff all the time.
Jane, is that fair enough? Is that something that you would go along with?
Absolutely. First of all, I consider myself so lucky that I've got a supportive family. I worry for people who are on their own, who don't have that support, and how on earth they deal with it on a day-to-day basis. Talking about your family makes it worse, doesn't it?
Yeah.
47% of cancers are rare and less common, and we can't expect GPs really to know about every one of them.
Have you met other people with a similar diagnosis, Jane, since your own?
Oh yes, I find NC UK is invaluable in that it puts you in touch with other people with the same cancer across the spectrum, lung, pancreas, bowel, and met some lovely people. And we have natter groups where you can learn something new every time, but also it's overseen by the net nurse from NC UK, so it doesn't go off on tangents and become a bit wacky or anything like that. And I think they're great.
Can I ask a quick question, Steve? Is that okay?
Of course, yeah, go for it, yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered, both from your points of view, Catherine and Jane, is there a difference between, with the support group, the uptake from men and women? That was one question. I mean, because obviously when you talked about the loneliness and, how it affects, family and the person itself. And I think a lot of times we want people to come out and seek support, but obviously we have to go out there and offer the support. I'm just wondering about the balance between men and women's experience. I don't know if you know or anything, just out of curiosity.
I mean, there are certainly more women that attend than men, and I think that's across the board. I don't think that's a surprise. But we have a few, and we've been trying to look at ways to change this. And in fact, we've got a couple of great ambassadors who are men, who very openly said, "There's no way I am going to a support group. It is just not for me."
Yeah.
No. And then they've gone and actually found it really, really helpful. And then they've spoken out about it and kind of done little videos and stories going, "I promise you guys, it's not what you think." And, I didn't want to go because I felt like I've just got to kind of deal with it. And and I don't think that's unusual for neuroendocrine cancer. I think would you say that's probably similar across all cancers?
Feels like it's quite similar across the board, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I find at the natter groups, we're able to talk about symptoms and things that might not even raise an eyebrow when you're in clinic talking to a medical professional. And they are a big worry and a big effect on people's lives. And you can talk to other patients and think, oh, yeah, that is a thing then, and yeah, not alone. And
when you talk to other people who've been diagnosed with a similar cancer to yourself, do you get the same experience from them of the uncertainty over the diagnosis, the length of time it might have taken, the difficult appointments where something is wrong? Is that all quite common among people with neuroendocrine cancer?
Things obviously patients are different, people are different, aren't they? And some people deal with it in different ways. But I early on saw, before I went to the Royal Free, went and I saw a video of somebody talking about having neuroendocrine cancer and living with neuroendocrine cancer. And that gave me an enormous amount of hope, more than any clinic appointment or anything, that she was actually living and is still living with neuroendocrine cancer. And that is heartening because there's so many whats and ifs and buts and uncertainty. You ask them, oh, how long have I got to live, and things often, and they can't really define how long you've got to live at all.
Is that hard, having, I imagine when my first wife had breast cancer, you can, it's not too difficult to find answers to some of the more common questions. It's a bit harder when it's, more specific to you, but it's a bit harder to find, easier to find information. Has that been difficult for you? Sort of not, obviously, Catherine's wonderful charity, but, more broadly, maybe difficulty in finding answers to questions?
There's a wealth of information on the NC UK website.
Yeah.
Covering every type of neuroendocrine cancer, the suggested pathway, symptoms, treatments. Huge resource. Elsewhere, you'll find a little bit on Cancer Research UK, but it's not specific enough. So NC UK should be recommended to all patients with neuroendocrine cancer.
And I think it's also really vital. I mean, we advocate a lot to ensure that patients get to see the experts in this condition, because we actually have 14 centres of excellence in the UK. So we're not short of people with a huge amount of expertise. And often you can get patients even more confused and more alone when they go to see a non-specialist who doesn't know too much about neuroendocrine cancer, doesn't have access to the latest research, doesn't have access to the latest therapies, treatments or scans, especially some of the nuclear medicine imaging, etc. And so that's really important. Like any other cancer, whatever cancer type you've got, you would go to see that particular expert in that cancer type, and there should be no difference when you have a neuroendocrine cancer. I mean, it should just be that should just be, and that's what this pathway is. That we've been working with Teresa and the team with is just about saying it's no different to any other pathway. We just need to integrate it to make sure that people get to see the right person at the right time.
And getting the start of the pathway right, though, as well, isn't it? We talked a little bit earlier on about primary care and some of the patients, their first interaction with a GP. If you've got somebody, if somebody was listening now and they were thinking, well, I'm a GP, I see so many people with some of these symptoms every day, every week. How on earth, what are the kind of extra maybe telltales that it's something a bit different to what the obvious thing I'm thinking might be?
I think it's because it doesn't fit in. You'll quite often have bouts of, I don't know, whatever you might get, bouts of bowel problems or whatever else you might get. But these don't go away, and the person will keep coming back, and they won't fit the pathway of whatever you're thinking it is. So there will be some differentials, but unless you've got a suspicion in your head, if you don't suspect it, you can't detect it, is the big phrase for the international community. But it won't fit normal IBS. As I said, diagnosing someone with that over the age of 50, that's just wrong. So first of all, that's wrong. So whatever the bowel symptoms are, they won't be normal, and the patient will keep coming back. And it would be so lovely to have that kind of 3 strikes and you're in rule, rather than 3 strikes and you're out. Just so you could think, well, hold on, something is wrong with this person. I think continuity as well. When a patient keeps going back to the GP, it'd be so great if it was the same GP. So that they don't have to retell that story and get that awful story fatigue, and then builds up that anxiety. And they might just then think, something not quite right with this person. I can't put my finger on it. But it's suspicion. From the diagnostic point of view, it's just thinking about it. This isn't like a common bowel cancer. It's not a common breast cancer. It's not a common lung cancer. But there's something
being open-minded,
open-minded
to something that
it
might be. Sarita, what's the key thing then when putting this pathway together that we're talking about here? What are the key things you're trying to get right? The key kind of milestones, the key elements of this pathway.
So it's the awareness has to be the very beginning. So we, as you're aware, of Prostate Cancer Alliance, we have 3 kind of defined programs. So this is where I would work much closer with my colleagues on the prevention and early detection side of the pathway, because there's a lot of primary care interface. So when we're talking about signs and symptoms, and again, as Catherine mentioned, there's an ideal pathway that we're looking to get adopted across North East London that defines exactly what should happen to a patient and where the next step should be. But if we're talking to our primary care, so through education and awareness, and I think, again, Jane, your story is so powerful. Every time I hear it, we've got the resources now to build that story, to encompass that within our educational kind of endeavours when that comes. But also the charity and CUK, you've got like a toolkit that, again, is about promoting resources already there. And can we kind of commit with primary care to have some of these regular training sessions? And ultimately, if a patient's been, I'm not going to, being pushed from pillar to post, and it's been a very long, convoluted journey for them, to think, could it be a neuroendocrine? And then, as Catherine said, is just seek advice from a professional. If it's not a cancer, seek advice from a different condition, but at least cross off those ticks rather than thinking it might be cancer at the very last stages. You know, if all else fails, might be cancer. I think that's the wrong thing to do.
And how important is the stuff that Jane was talking about, the the patient networks, that kind of thing, the advocacy? What kind of
Absolutely.
important part of the whole picture is all that?
Yeah, so I think advocacy is within our gift, and I hope as we're starting our journey to try and really cement that. We've got various different patient groups and communities of practices for patients that bring together both the hospitals, charities, and the patients and carers together, because I feel like we talk very much around breast and colorectal and prostate and all the big tumor sites, but actually it is wider than that. And we do want to try and create an environment where people with different cancers can join that, and it's not just the usual big tumor groups. So Jane and I think we've got a journey to do to kind of build that group within Northeast London. The charity is obviously UK wide, but it's that local support, and how do we support the local people?
Jane,
I
how
don't know if I'm
important is
answering
that?
your question properly.
Yeah, no, no,
Sorry.
you have, yeah. Jane, how important has your kind of the networks that you found? How important have they been? Whether they've been through Catherine's charity or other more informal networks. How important has it been to find other people with the same or a similar condition?
It's very important to me, and I've found a lot of support through that. I think I've found some other people possibly too. I'm very grateful to Sarita for taking this on board, because things don't change very quickly in the NHS, I'm afraid, and she's really been trying to push this. Very grateful to NCU UK, because without it there would be very little available for patients.
It just makes you feel a little bit less alone, I guess, doesn't it, Jane? When you have I imagine when you have what people keep telling you is quite a rare thing. Oh, that's unusual. That's a rare thing. I imagine it might be quite easy to feel quite isolated.
Especially when they follow it up with, "Oh, but you look so well," and
Oh dear.
you feel like rubbish
Yeah.
themselves. But
Yeah.
I've heard a consultant very early on who said that the best informed patients have the best outcomes, really. And I think that's very true, especially in neuroendocrine cancer. Obviously, there's the things you can't change, but just being aware of treatments, being able to ask for treatments. And without NCUK, how do you find out what is available, what you should be asking for?
I think self-advocacy has become, even more important for all of us, to try and understand where we go and what we do and what we can expect. I think, in a struggling NHS, that's something that, we really need to do. But, I also think there needs to be far more coordination certainly with specialised cancer organisations like ourselves. The amount of donations that we get that go towards, providing a completely national psychotherapy service, because people can't access what they need within their local areas is, something that's quite a challenge for small organisations. And you feel such a responsibility to be able to continue those services. But I feel it's something that everyone has a right to get, especially when they're dealing with such a condition of living with cancer. It sounds like it's sort of a better option, but in fact it can be so psychologically demanding.
Yeah. Before we finish, then, Catherine, just give us a bit of a rundown on the charity and tell us how do people get in touch? What kind of services do you guys offer? Who do you want to hear from?
Well, of course, anybody that's been diagnosed with neuroendocrine cancer is really welcome. We've tried to build a community. That's been the most important thing about this organisation, so that people feel like they've got a place that that they feel safe and comfortable, and they can be educated and supported by other people living with this disease. We obviously, as you know, we provide a number of patient support groups. We facilitate monthly educational webinars. We do patient education events where people can all come together. We provide a lot of online material, videos, patient experiences, etc. We do quite a lot of policy work, sort of behind the scenes, developing things like this pathway, getting the right incidence and prevalence data, working with the Get Data Out project, working with certain NHS bodies to try and improve outcomes for patients. We provide funding for research to our UK researchers in neuroendocrine cancer. We have a specialist nurse helpline that's open 3 days a week. I can't remember now myself. And that has a really amazing two specialist nurses that run that, and also a patient with neuroendocrine cancer who's one of our support coordinators who works with us as well. And then obviously we do, the usual things like, trying to do some fundraising and bits and pieces like that. But I think, our biggest piece of work has been around recognition and equity. It is not fair that this community has been forgotten. And I don't know how much more we can say or do to prove that they have been forgotten. And we just want to change that. So we're just doing everything in our power to do that. And we will be launching a State of the Nation report next year, which really highlights exactly, where we're at and what needs to change. And I would agree, it's great that, the ICBs and the alliances, if they could join us and help us. It's not a financial thing, it's just about integration, recognition and education. And that's really important. But I say anyone can get in touch with us. It's obviously Neuroendocrine Cancer UK, and they can go to the website, and everything is on there that you need.
Could I add on to that?
Go on, yeah, Jane, go for it. Yeah.
Be aware that because my diagnosis was so late and it was metastatic, that I've cost the NHS a fortune. What with the lanreotide injections, radiotherapy, chemo again, clinic, and if people were diagnosed sooner, it would save the NHS an absolute fortune.
Yeah.
The way it's set up is you go to the GP, they might send you one route. You go back to the GP, they might send you another. And so it's important to send people on the right route straight away. So rather than, it's a middle-aged woman, let's send her down the gynae route, try the non-specific symptom pathway, because hopefully somebody there will have more knowledge of other cancers, other rare cancers.
Well, thank goodness for people like you, Jane, speaking up and telling your story, and for you, Catherine, as well, to for putting the charity together so that people like Jane have more support, more resources. Because as I said, I can only imagine how difficult it is when you can't find other people who are going through something similar, and you can't find answers to questions. And Sarita, thank you so much as well, because I know you guys are doing amazing work, not just in this kind of cancer, but I know all across the range of tumour sites. So thank you all for your work. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you.